everybody. We're just waiting for everybody to get in from the lobby. Okay, a few more people joining, so we'll just give them a chance to get on screen. Okay, bear with me a second. I'm just going to stop sharing and reshare. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Net Zero Week presentation. So this is the Railway Industry Association's contribution to Net Zero Week. There's many other videos available as part of Net Zero Week, so please take your opportunity to take a look at those, covering a whole range of different topics across the subject of net zero. And of course, what we're talking about today is how to achieve a net zero railway. So without any further ado, we'll get going. So this is the program that we're doing this morning. So the introduction is actually from me, David Clarke, rather than Richard. Unfortunately, Richard's been called away. So I'm David Clarke, Senior Technical Advisor at the Railway Industry Association. I'm shortly going to hand over to Noah Myers from the RSSB, who's going to talk about their good work around system-wide carbon management. And then it'll come back to me and Rob Hay, and we're going to talk about a lower cost, higher performing net zero railway. That title is carefully chosen because in our opinion, going to net zero is not just about reducing carbon, it's also about a better railway, a lower cost, higher performing railway. Robert's going to demonstrate his traction decarb data tool that we use to develop our strategy, and I'm going to wrap up just talking about some of the work that we're currently working on, which we're terming tentatively the Decarbonisation Delivery Challenge. As we go along, if you have a question, if something occurs to you, then just simply put it in the chat. There's a Q&A option on your screen. So you can put a Q&A in the in that interface, and we will pick up those questions at the end. So the questions, as it says there, will be at the end of the session. But also at the end, if you have a question you'd like to ask verbally, then we'll be able to allow you to turn your screen and microphone on and ask your question in the traditional way. So without any further ado, I will get on and I will hand over to Noah. So Noah, if you'd like to take over the screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Noah Myers, and I am the carbon lead at RSSB. I'm part of the Sustainability Directorate and am in charge of, if you will, trying to implement the rail blueprint in the with respect to net zero carbon. And today we're going to talk about how we might maybe approach the challenges of net zero in rail from a kind of rail-wide perspective or a system-wide perspective. As you all know, there are numerous companies, thousands with the supply chain, of course, and many of the staff of those companies are don't have a lot of resource in the sustainability realm, and so we're looking at ways that we can make this challenging endeavor of trying to move toward net zero just a bit easier. So I'm going to present some of the things that we're doing, but also am really hoping to gain feedback from the group on where we can place more effort to try to accelerate the path to net zero, and also just make it easier to do that. So, our thought is by trying to solve problems across rail, as opposed, we can alleviate some of the demands on individual companies, thereby saving time and money, maybe hopefully paving the way for innovation, streamlining processes, and improving data collection and reporting, which is quite cumbersome at the moment. On various levels, the reduction trajectory, if you will, across rail, and some of the changes that need to happen within rail are not moving fast enough. So we're really hoping that this can help. So today I'm going to talk about several challenges that we're looking at. There's more, of course, but this gives you a flavor of some of the things that we're doing, and hopefully stimulate some thought on other opportunities. First being multimodal integration. When you look at the emissions across the transport sector, it is the leading source of emissions in the UK. Rail is less than 2% of that. So on one level, the more that we can reduce emissions from the transport sector as a whole, the more impact we will have, as opposed to reducing emissions within rail itself. I mean, there are some very important reasons for reducing emissions within rail, but the point is that, as you all know, finding a way to improve the transport system, both in terms of freight and in passenger modes, is key to the successful net zero trajectory for rail. So there's a number of challenges that we're up against. One is that while there's a lot of guidance, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of initiatives, many of the stakeholders have expressed that it's very difficult to weave their way through that, especially with limited resources. So one of the things we've done, which I'll touch on briefly, is create guidance that pulls all that information together and provides a kind of step-by-step, approach for tackling the modal integration. We're also heavily involved in the first last mile network that has been established by Network Rail. We didn't form that group, but we're making a pitch for it because it's been extremely helpful, and it's very active. Another area that's come into focus for us recently is how a lot of the government policy is very much underpinned by the electrification of road vehicles, and is not focused on modal shift. And we've recently had a chat with the Climate Change Committee on that, and are trying to move them toward a more creative view of how transport emissions might be reduced. For that, we're going to need more evidence and research on modal shift, and it's something we'll be trying to achieve. So the guidance itself, it basically, as I said, helps guide operators through the process of looking at multimodal integration, prioritizing which stations need the most effort or can gain the most benefit, and how to weave the way through the various stakeholders and options and guidance. And there's a link there if you're interested. Carbon accounting. Now, I consider myself somewhat of a specialist of carbon accounting, but I do know that we're not going to save the world by carbon accounting. But nonetheless, it does become a necessary evil, if you will. It can suck up a lot of time, and it can create difficulty making decisions and complying if we don't have the good information, the good framework. So one of the early initiatives on the blueprint is to just lay out a more common systemic approach to carbon accounting across rail. And we're on the verge of publishing the Rail Carbon Accounting Framework, which lays out the guidance on carbon accounting in rail and how the greenhouse gas protocol is applied. In the course of doing this, we run up against a number of issues and realize that, especially with respect to SBTI, but also in terms of strategic decisions, a corporate scope 1, 2, 3 approach isn't necessarily the most helpful. And in fact, it can be detrimental. And many companies are simply not, well, technically they can't meet the SBTI because of various SBTI rules. So one of the things we're doing is engaging with the SBTI on developing a new standard for transport, and we're supporting them in the development of that. That may take a while, so we're also looking at a more industry-wide, perhaps, framework for how carbon is measured and managed. The idea, I don't want to go to a lot of detail, is that the dark blue scope or air boundaries are what a lot of companies are measuring, and in terms of their impact. And we want to expand those boundaries so that the entire transport system, more in the value chain, other rail entities are taken into account. Supply chain data, once again, data is almost is a bit of a necessary evil to help make decisions and comply with requirements. The entire industry is based primarily on spend-based data, which makes it very difficult to track emissions. It makes it very difficult to do a lot of different things. So we're working very closely with talks to begin with, but we hope to expand that throughout the network, or once we kind of gain a methodology to streamline how data is collected and develop metrics for that. We produced last year, we produced a guidance on carbon accounting, carbon data collection in the supply chain that tries to streamline requirements based on the impacts. So companies that are small, companies that don't have much impact, have very relatively low reporting requirements. Other companies have higher requirements. It was good that we got that out there, but it needs a lot of work. We need to make it shorter, easier to follow. We need to make it more specific, and we knew it wasn't perfect. And so this year we're focusing very much on improving that, and hopefully with the idea that it can be integrated into procurement requirements to make it easier and more consistent in asking for data. So once again, we're looking at, in terms of talks, looking across the various key suppliers and assessing how they measure their carbon, and whether kind of bespoke spend-based metrics or other carbon intensity metrics can be developed, or if nothing else, we can help them improve their reporting. There's another, more on the technology front, stations provide a great potential for solar. However, there are numerous obstacles, procedural obstacles, and what we're finding is that each station and each station manager is trying to tackle these on their own, one at a time. And contractors as well, who are well-meaning and want to help rail move along, are finding it very difficult to install solar in the rail network. So what we're looking to do is to try to smooth out some of those barriers, and also produce guidance that helps the various players navigate through the requirements for solar so that each station isn't inventing its own wheel, so to speak. And this may also lead into maybe certain contracts or whatever to make things, to approach things on a more portfolio basis rather than a station by station basis. This is a pretty messy slide. I'm not sure how it got in here, but essentially a lot of this information all comes together in what's called what we're calling the Sustainable Insights platform, which is basically a data hub. RSSB for years has managed safety data and offered a platform where various parties can dip in and dip out and get the information they need and help data move around the industry. It's hugely important for carbon because of Scope 3 data, for example. There's massive amounts of supplier data. There's massive amounts of data from various organizations. So we're moving toward a data management system that enables the flow of data across industry. So those are a few of the things we're doing. We'd welcome more thoughts later on.
Thank you very much, Noah. Really good introduction, thank you, and ahead of time, so thank you for that too. I'll try and stick with that and try and stay on time. So I'm going to pick up from where we left off. So hopefully everybody can see my slide deck now. So as I said earlier, Robert and I are going to talk about delivering a lower cost, higher performing net zero railway by 2050. And this is a piece of work from a report that we published last year. And really, it's not the role of a trade association like the Railway Industry Association to be doing strategies saying how to decarbonize or implement any other major initiative on the railway. But we felt really passionate about the issue, and nobody else was doing it. And there seemed to be a view that it was all very difficult. So we set out to show that actually it was possible and could be done. And it can't be that difficult because Robert and I, the two of us, and Robert in particular, did all of this work. So we have here what you might call a straw person as to how we think you could decarbonize the railway and achieve a better railway at the end of it, a lower cost and higher performing railway. So we'll run through the where are we now, just a bit of background. We'll run through the methodology, Robert will cover that, and then we'll just wrap up with conclusions and recommendations. And then the next stage after that is Rob will demonstrate the tool, the database that we built to do this work, or he built, to be fair. So a bit of background, we have the industry for years has suffered boom and bust across all disciplines. This is the profile of rolling stock, and we wrote a report about that. And I think you would say that if that was a car factory, it would have been out of business, or any other kind of manufacturing entity, it would have been out of business long ago. And that illustrates the challenge that the industry faces. We have a similar graph for infrastructure, in this case, electrification. And you'll probably seen this graph before and you'll see it again. But basically, it shows a number of things. It shows we have in the past done rather a lot of electrification. Sometimes, like in the 80s with East Coast, we've done it relatively efficiently. And in the 2000s, in the 20-teens, we weren't always so efficient. And that's what this report on the right-hand side is about. When Great Western went horribly wrong, we were concerned that that would mean that there was a real question about future electrification. So we developed this report that we called the RIA Electrification Cost Challenge, and that looked at the 20 or so projects that have been delivered in that period, and it actually found that 3/4 of them were delivered relatively efficiently. And the one of the reasons we had problems with some of the projects, and notably Great Western, is whatever you've been doing for a living, if you have a period where you don't do very much of it for 20 years, you're going to be a bit out of practice, to say the least. You'll have lost a whole set of skills in the industry. So I would diagnose in simple terms that the problem with Great Western is that instead of just trying to do one project, we try to do about 10, and we try to ramp up too quickly, and we overpromised and underdelivered as an industry. The wavy line along the middle is the volume that Germany has consistently delivered over the last 50 years. And guess who is the more cost effective in delivering electrification? And sadly, it isn't us. And I think that continuity of employment and activity is really important. So in technology terms, we now see battery trains being readily available. 10 years ago, they were a concept. Now you can go and ride on them as a passenger, and every manufacturer will offer you a battery train. So there are other options for decarbonisation, not just putting up the wires. So this was a snapshot in time last year, and we assessed that the current level of electrification was 38%. The projects that were underway would take that to 48%. And if they did what the previous government was calling Network North, they would get to 51%. Where we are at the moment is we're probably stuck at the 48% because, for example, Midland Main Line yesterday was put on pause in the government's most recent announcement. But we don't think that's adequate because we're not in a status quo position. And basically this report here that Steer did on our behalf, the punchline is that any way you look at it, you could estimate that passenger traffic will grow between 37 and 97% by 2050. So we need to provide for more customers. We're not just electrifying the status quo. Of course, freight is key. And I probably don't need to tell this audience, but freight, because of the power demands of freight, it really needs continuous electrification. And helpfully, the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport had produced this report on the left-hand side there, which we took and built into our report. And basically what they identified, from memory, I think it's about 800 kilometers that you would need to electrify in order to get the 97% of freight under the wires and decarbonized in that way. And you'll not be surprised to learn that 800 kilometers is pretty much all the trunk routes which you'd want to electrify for passengers anyway. So we built that in as into our plans. And so then Rob cranked the handle on his database, and if you built in that 800 kilometers, you rise to 51.5% electrified for the little bits of infill they were recognizing, and then the 800 kilometers takes you up to 59%. And before decarbonisation became a driving force, if you looked around Europe, most European railways are electrified to around about 50 to 60%. Some like Switzerland, for example, are more, like 100%. But so that's the background. We then did a load of analysis to, in simple terms, draw a map of what should be electrified and what shouldn't. And I'm going to hand over to Robert to take you through that.
Next slide, please, David. Thank you. Good morning. I'll go through the sort of technical work behind this later, but what I found from initial investigation, if you looked at current battery capability of about 60 to 80 kilometers was the sort of accepted battery range before we had battery trains running, but it was the accepted battery range, that actually there's about 216 regular routes in the UK that use diesel traction, and out of those about 105 of those routes are less than 60 kilometres and 20 are less than 80 kilometres. Which means that if you want to put a battery train in and instead of electrifying, then you can start doing that now. Next slide. Next slide. Oops. So if you start doing that now, you can buy trains now, and you can buy battery trains or battery electric bi-mode trains now. And as the electrification plan that we contemplated or we thought about continues, then you're able to transfer those battery trains to other routes where the maximum distance comes down to the 60 or 80 threshold, whilst you replace some of the older trains with new fully electric trains, meaning that by 2050, if you were to buy a fleet of battery trains now, you would still need that same rough size of battery fleet by 2050, but have a larger now fleet of fully electric. So with a little bit of planning, government oversight, or guiding mind oversight, we could buy trains now that would roll out a decarbonisation rolling stock strategy. Next one, please. And this is the graph that we come up to. I'll go through more detail later how you can actually see the details of it, but this is the graph that we came up to that would give 100% passenger decarbonisation, the red lines being the OLE network of the future, and 95% of freight decarbonisation. Next slide. Back to David. David? Unmute, David.
Yep, thanks very much, Robert. What we came up with from that map, and I think the important thing about the map is it makes clear what needs to be electrified, which is, surprise, surprise, the intensively used lines. And equally important, it makes clear what doesn't need to be electrified, the place where there's no freight or very little freight, and you've got the opportunity with battery electric multiple units. So we came up with what the numbers worked out to what we termed the plan of thirds. So basically, we have a situation where there's a third of the network already electrified. It's actually about 39%. There's a third we don't believe needs to be electrified because we can roll out battery electric multiple units, and they'll deliver immediate passenger benefits, address the order book gap that was particularly prevalent at the time we wrote the report, be lower cost than replacement diesels, and potentially be privately financed. So from a government point of view, we don't see any reason why you couldn't just get on with this today. And finally, there's the further third that does need to be electrified. And what we are recommending is that should be done in a rolling program of electrification. And the next but one part of this webinar this morning, we'll talk about the work that we're doing to try and make the case for that rolling program of electrification. So our position is that if you followed this plan of thirds, you'd end up with decarbonising 100% of passenger and 95% of freight, but you'd only need to electrify 1/3 of the network or another third of the network to achieve that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And what's it's worth saying is that since we produced this report, we're very pleased to say that the Network Rail System Operator has taken our work and is doing a very similar piece of work, sort of sanity checking what we're doing, and obviously going into it much greater depth and thoroughness than we were able to do within RIA with our limited resources. We made a bunch of recommendations. What would a report be if it didn't have recommendations? And I won't go through them blow by blow, but just to summarize where we are a year after the publication of or just over a year after the publication of the report. So we've rag rated it here. There is work going on to confirm the minimum footprint of electrification. I've just mentioned that. And we hope that very soon that will result in some kind of map being published to industry. And we feel that's really important, because if we are clear as an industry about what we would electrify to get to net zero, that's not saying that we automatically get the money to do that. But if we're clear about what we will and won't electrify, it gives some clarity to investors, perhaps people who have freight operators who want to buy locomotives, or passenger operators. They get a bit of clarity. They might not yet know exactly when it's going to be electrified, but at least they know what is and isn't going to be electrified. We're not yet GBRTT. We're not really seeing work visibly on developing a strategy. There may be things going on behind closed doors that we're not aware of. But we can't see that. Again, we're not yet seeing the whole system thinking about smoothing fleet demands, because another piece of the work that we did here was identifying that actually, if you had a guiding mind, you could actually manage the rolling stock procurement in a way that would be much smoother than we'd seen in the past. You could mesh the rollout of electrification with the replacement of rolling stock and have a much smoother profile. We are seeing movement and addressing what we call cumulative carbon reduction, because what we think is important is the aggregate total of what we're achieving as an industry and air quality improvement. And actually, the industry is doing a lot in that area, and Noah touched on some of that. We'd like to see more whole system evaluation. Not enough of that yet. And we're not really thinking, I don't think, about the sustainability of the supply chain. Sadly, there was an example yesterday where Midland Main Line has been put on pause, and that potentially means that the delivery resources, those people's jobs may well be at risk, because there's not another electrification project for them to go on to. So when we turn around in a few years' time and realize we need to be electrifying, those skills will have disappeared from the rail industry, because the electricity industry has got a massive investment in national grids. So, I wish those people well, but I imagine they'll have gone off to work for National Grid. That's the piece of work we did, but in order to do it, we developed a database. And Rob, if I can hand back to you to talk about the Traction Decarb data tool.
Thanks, David. If you could click to the next slide, please. When we were starting writing the paper, I suppose these were my thoughts. Can we decarbonize traction by 2050? It was an objective, but I hadn't seen a plan. If we can, what should we do to decarbonize by 2050 was my next thought. And then I suppose thought 3 was, well, what's the minimum we need to do? Can I answer yes to the question that we can decarbonize traction in the railway by 2050? Can I answer it yes? And if I can, what would it look like, and what would the rolling stock be, and what would the infrastructure be? And then my next question is, well, where are we just now? Next one. So I used the font of all knowledge, which is Wikipedia, which was actually very, very good. And Wikipedia told me if I went through every operator, there was 216 or 226 carbon using routes. Then I got a little bit more technical, and on the Network Rail website, they've got digital timetables. There's 195 timetables that you have to click on so you can get both directions of journey. So that's, yeah, quite a lot, 390 timetables worth of information. So yeah, you download that and you put it into a bit of Excel, and then you start getting facts, and facts were quite important to us, because we got lots of challenges, lots of questions when we were brainstorming, talking to the supply chain and other interested bodies. So we sort of knew how many trains and were running around, but it was in Excel. Next slide, please. Now, and this is an advert for the Rail Data Marketplace. Sort of shameless plug for the Rail Data Marketplace. If anybody's working in the rail industry in the call, having a look at the Rail Data Marketplace, being demanding of the Rail Data Marketplace, they take requests for data that's not there, and they try and get that data provided. But they've worked really hard with the train operating companies, and there's a lot of train plans from the train operating companies in the Rail Data Marketplace. So that data then gets downloaded and used initially in Excel. Next, please. So now I know all of the train services, all of the times of the train services in the UK, but I don't know what bits of track they go on. So I used a product called Scribble Maps, and I drew a representation of the UK network. And it's split up into individual sections. So each individual section, and there is 1,960 individual sections, they have unique service patterns over them. Each individual section can be given, what's the word? Parameters. So on the chart, you can see the parameters, whether it's freight only, the speed of the line, whether the TDNS, what the TDNS solution was, what the RIA strategy is, what the RIA electrification phase is. So therefore, I made up a map of the UK network, again, with lots and lots of data. The next one, please. And then again in Excel is a wonderful tool. Excel, when you start with Excel, you start doing these simple calculations, and then as I get more engrossed in the analysis, the calculations get more and deeper and deeper. And in order for me to work out my strategy, down the bottom there were 47 linked worksheets to calculate what our strategy is and when decarbonisation would happen. So an awful lot of data, an awful lot of calculation power, an awful lot of macros, and the data was taking a long time to process, but it was really good data. Next. Just something that David discussed or mentioned earlier, and it was part of our strategy. We tried to model an electrification plan that had a reasonably consistent rolling program of electrification, and we modelled them in five-year blocks, effectively. Hence the different the different colours. We didn't want to come up with a plan that was wildly above the capabilities of the railway. So we looked at the projects, we looked at what was needing to be done, and we come up with an initial estimate of what the plan would be. But the plan tied back into the Excel allowed me to see which routes and services would be able to be run with a battery or fully electric train in which 5-year block. So that allowed us to have a plan. The next slide. And then I discovered Power BI. Power BI is a wonderful tool. So I put the data into Power BI and started talking with people who were helping contribute their input. And they says, oh, this is great. Can we have access? Can we see it? The Power BI for me was a working tool. It wasn't pretty. It did calculations a lot better. It managed data a lot better and a lot more robustly. And then the next slide, I believe. So we thought, let's share the Power BI tool. let's share all the data, the 390 network rail timetables, the 20 train operating company timetables, the 1,900 data segments of the railway. So let's share that, share the data, but also share our working a little bit. So I'm going to just share my screen now and just share the Power BI report so that we can see how it works.
Just while Rob's setting that up, it's worth saying we have to do our work from public domain information, because we're, as a trade association, we don't have access to all the databases. So I think if we've achieved one thing with the strategy, it's that we've got Network Rail System Operator who does have the sophisticated and accurate databases to take inspiration from what we've done and go away and do it with those more sophisticated databases. Okay, back to you, Rob.
More sophisticated, but not as pretty as a Power BI report so far that I've seen. And they have, the system operator have shared their thoughts and their maps with us. They've presented it at some of the RIA members meetings. I'm not yet allowed to show the comparison on the database, but it's there. And when I have approval from the system operator, that will also add on to our database. So database, Power BI is a lovely way of making data presentable. So here's a plan. So this is our plan for decarbonisation. So if you've not used Power BI, it's actually quite simple and easy to use. These are the current electrified lines, one would hope. No. Current status, sorry. This is phase 1 electrification. So that's what we propose for phase 1. Oh, it worked better a minute ago, sorry. Things tend to work slightly different when you're in presenter mode than when you're in live mode. Anyway, when you have, if you have access to it, you can select the phases of electrification. You can select the operator that's running. It shows you the routes. It shows you the number of sections. The calculator then works out the decarbonisation phase. Sorry. That's better. Sorry, I was in the wrong page. There. So that shows our electrification phase. It shows you the lines that we propose electrification in phase 1. Mostly these were existing projects and Scotland's proposal. Phase 2, more Scotland electrification, some proposed in Network North, some freight, CILT electrification. Phase 3, phase 4, phase 5. So that allows you, that screen allows you to look at what our proposal was for electrification. The decarbonisation phase, sorry for my error earlier, shows you which routes will then be able to be electrified in the phases. So once phase 1 is completed according to our electrification plan, it shows you the routes that then become decarbonised. That was just cross country. This is for all the operators. So you can walk through and see when routes would become decarbonised according to our plan. But once you have data and you start drawing graphs and you start being able to manage it using the sort of tools that Power BI has, you can start to think about things. And one of the things I thought about for the decarbonisation strategy was battery trains, and they need to be charged, and they need to be charged at terminus stations. So let's have a look at how many trains go to a terminus station each day. Carlisle, wee quiet station in the West Coast. Well, actually, there's 72 services from Carlisle, but if you look at starting from Carlisle, 72 originate from Carlisle. So that makes one think of the challenge of charging battery trains, 72 battery trains at that terminus station. The data's all there, gleaned from the timetables, so you can see when, you can see how long between trains, so you can start thinking about whether you can have a battery charging strategy. And that's one of the things you can get when you have data to play with. So I found that really, really interesting. The other thing you can do is you can see which route is the highest carbon burden in the UK. Well, London to Penzance, because it's got 11 trains one way, 10 trains the other way each day, is the highest carbon burden. This can be, you can use this to start thinking about strategy for electrification for reducing carbon, to help think about the decisions behind it. And then the other one is, so I can't see the top when I'm sharing the screen. And the other one is what sections of track actually have got high carbon burdens. Montrose to Aberdeen, surprisingly, is this second highest section of track, 65 kilometres, 5,785 diesel kilometres per day on that section of track. So having the data in one place and being able to cut it and shut it the way you want. And some of these graphs, some of these sheets have come from conversations with members and colleagues, allows you to think maybe definitely or more clearly about the challenge of electrification or decarbonisation. And we've put in rolling stock orders. This is one of the graphs we share. There is other data that goes into the database that we can that is accessible. So this database is available on RIA's website. If I stop sharing, David, and if you take over, David.
Will do. Yeah, just about to take over.
The link is in the bottom of this page.
Hang on. What am I? Hang on, I'm sharing the wrong thing. Bear with me.
I've been sharing the link to this with a few members.
I've put it online actually. So sorry, I put it in the chat. I mean,
okay.
Right, I've been too clever. I've moved to another window and lost my slide deck in the process. So, yep, okay.
So I've been sharing it online. I've been sharing the database with members since I've had it on the website, and had really interesting questions back and been able to alter it to suit. So I'm not saying I can provide a 100% service, but I am interested in developing the data and seeing what messages it can tell us. So if anybody has questions, feel free to contact me.
Thanks very much, Robert. And I think whilst we recognise that it's not our role, for example, to say what should be electrified when, and the phasing that Rob's put together shows the art of the possible. But also some of the tools that he's just been demonstrating in terms of understanding where the carbon burden is, gives existing train operators and others a really good resource to just help check their thinking and look at options. So we hope that'll be really useful. And for those involved in rolling stock, the rolling stock database, it can be interrogated as well. So in terms of when stock was ordered and what it is and how old it is, etc. So, so those that sort of brings us up to the work that we did, culminating in the publication of the report last year. So we'd effectively, in our mind, drawn a map to show that it would be possible to decarbonize by 2050 if you took a strategy something like ours and resourced it and rolled it out. The problem is, and we understand that government is financially challenged, and the industry is going through a reorganization, and therefore might not be as focused as we might like on developing future strategy. So we realized there was a piece of work that we hadn't done. I don't think we felt that we'd made the case for a rolling program of electrification, and we're still delivering electrification project by project. So we wanted to do something about that, and that's what we're tentatively calling the working title is the Decarbonisation Delivery Challenge. And let me just quickly talk to you about that a little bit. So first question, which Rob's already posed, is how much electrification is needed for net zero? The document on the left-hand side was the Traction Decarbonisation Network Strategy, the TDNS, published in 2020. I and many others were involved in that. We thought it was a good and sound document at the time, but it didn't, at the time, we weren't confident in batteries. It's amazing how much has moved on in 5 years. At that stage, there was the very first early prototypes, and that was about it. Whereas now, as I mentioned earlier, you can go and ride on a battery train in service. So that was recommending 90+% of electrification. We're only recommending 66%. I think you can guess what's changed because I've already mentioned it. Battery trains are reality, whether they're sort of more more commuter, like the Core Valley lines on the left-hand side. And actually, there's other technology there where Core Valley lines is not continuously wired, for example. And on the right-hand side, more recently, there's been a demonstration of replacing diesel bi-mode with battery bi-mode. So taking out the diesel power packs and replacing them with battery power packs. And that's proven to be successable. That little graph down at the bottom right-hand corner is something that from our 2024 report, and that was done by one of our members, AD Little, and they analysed what we felt was a challenging diesel route, the diesel route from Exeter down to the southwest, and they accomplished what we call a total expenditure, if you like, whole life cost exercise. And it's interesting because what it shows, you've got the blue line there showing high, if this is electrification, high initial cost of electrification, but by year 29, that is a better business case than buying a new diesel. But the significant thing is if you bring in partial electrification and battery trains, the yellow line, you do have a slightly higher initial cost because you've got to buy some wires or some charging infrastructure, but that's better than a diesel by 14 years. So that, I think, really nicely illustrates why having a strategy, having an integrated whole system strategy would allow you to make the right decisions and run a better railway as well as decarbonising. There's been a lot of other progress since 2019. I've mentioned a couple of those. The third one on the list, voltage control clearance, is quite a technical thing, but it's and all credit to Network Rail here, who pioneered this, tested it, proved it, and changed the standards to allow this. This basically allows you to squeeze a wire under an existing bridge with about as little as 25 millimeters clearance, rather than the more like 300 millimeters that used to mean you had to reconstruct a lot of bridges. So what this means, and it's a dramatic opportunity to reduce the amount of bridges that are reconstructed. And traditionally, that's been about a third of the cost of electrification. There's many other technical innovations which are now just business as usual. And recent projects like Midland Main Line up to Wigston have demonstrated that we now know how to deliver electrification on time and on cost. But we think there's still an opportunity to reduce costs further. Now, the less promising progress is we're way off the pace to deliver the amount of electrification that's needed to get to net zero by 2050. And that's because there isn't a strategy like Rob's strategy that's committed and funded in England and Wales. There's not an agreement on what should or shouldn't be electrified. There's not a map like Robert's drawn. And that actually means we can't have sensible conversations with partners in the electricity industry and the rolling stock industry, because they don't know where we're going to put the wires up, and therefore they can't make sensible decisions. Scotland, all credit, has a strategy, but they're struggling to find the funding. And there's a real risk for rail if other modes decarbonise. As was mentioned earlier by Noah, there's a lot of focus on decarbonising the road sector with EVs. And to be fair, they are 90-something% of the problem. But as Noah also highlighted, there's not enough thinking about modal shift. The risk for rail is we move from being perceived as a low carbon clean mode to being a dirty mode. And also, if we don't start getting on with a bit of electrification, and we suddenly realize in the 2040s we need to we need to deliver it, we'll be trying to deliver something in 5 or 10 years, which will make us very inefficient and very disruptive potentially. And I would say that sadly, electrification's got a perception problem with decision makers who think we're inefficient, disruptive, and expensive. And I don't think those things are true, but I don't think we've made the case well enough to change the views of decision makers. And that's really what this report is about, or the report that we're working on is about. You've seen that graph before. You haven't seen the bit at the right-hand side. Rob showed a graph that said how much we felt we needed to electrify. If we were doing it steadily to achieve our 2/3 electrified, the third that already is, plus the third that needs to be electrified, we'd need to be delivering that sort of volume. Now, what I would say is that's a lot of electrification, but as you can see, it's not as much as we delivered in the 80s when we delivered it quite efficiently, or as much as we delivered it in the 20-teens when we didn't deliver it so efficiently. But I would argue that we've learned the lessons from the 20-teens, and if we were given the opportunity to do it again, we could be efficient. Witness recent projects that I've already mentioned, but I think there's still an opportunity to be even more efficient with a proper rolling program. Oops, sorry. Why do we need to do this report? We're not doing enough electrification, and a real worry is that we're not sustaining the supply chain capability. As I've already mentioned, there must be a threat to the people who've been working on Midland Main Line until recently, and it's still considered expensive. I should have updated this slide, but we know the June 11th spending review didn't change that. So we need a new piece of work, I think, setting out what needs to be different to be even more efficient. And this is what we feel needs to be different. We've done this by workshopping with colleagues from across an industry, from Network Rail, from train operators, and from RIA members. And I'm going to quickly run you through a slide on each of those headlines. So we need an agreed strategy. Rob's talked you through our idea of a strategy. The good news, as I've mentioned several times, is that Network Rail are working on something similar, and that's really, really positive. The problem really is what in government language is called affordability, effectively cash flow. And there's a big upfront cost to electrification to gain a long-term benefit. So the next part of the equation we're talking about is we need to have a program business case. We shouldn't be thinking about individual projects, because when you're trying to deliver a network electrification, there will be bits of railway that on their own don't make financial sense to electrify, but if you don't do them, you won't be able to operate the railway. So they need to be done, and therefore you need to wrap things up in a program business case. Now, the good news is that's what TDNS did, the Traction Decarbonisation Network Strategy. And when they did their business case, when they were trying to do 90% or proposing to do 90% of the network, they had a positive program business case. So that's looking at the whole network and saying, what's the business case for electrifying all of that rather than project by project? So if instead of doing 90%, if 90% gives you a positive business case, then 66% is going to give you an even more positive business case, we would suggest. So what we think you need to do, having made that decision, is allocate a funding envelope. So what I think that means is if you're doing 300 odd kilometers a year and it costs, let's say, 1.5 million per kilometer, then you need to have a 450 million allocation per annum. Big numbers, we know, but that's the kind of investment you need to make. This would allow a strategic engagement with the electricity suppliers and support the rolling stock plan, and allow you to start getting early benefits. And the key thing is moving from what I call a project by project thing to a program approach, program delivery of electrification. So that means you have a number of teams. Each team specializes in each one of these activities, like design or power supply or route clearance or OLE installation. They don't work in a specific project geography. They move from area to area as the need arises based upon the phase strategy, the kind of thing that Robert's described. And one of the first things you do, just as Scotland are doing, is you get the power, you decide, because you've got the map of what you want to do by 2050, you start putting the power in advance. We felt the key to this was demonstrating that if you adopted this approach, we could do it more cost effectively. So we looked at a project and we got hold of the data as to what cost breakdown of that project was. And this was a cost breakdown relatively early before existing efficiencies being applied to it. But you look at this cost breakdown, and the slightly frightening thing is only about half of it is what we call pounds in the ground. The other half are indirect costs. And I think we'd all agree that we can do better than that as an industry. And the good news is actually that the project we're looking at here has done that, and they've significantly reduced those indirects. But we did some workshops with Network Rail and suppliers, and we looked at each of those pieces of the pie, as it were, and said, what would need to be true to change that cost space? And what have we already done that we can, as it were, bank? So another significant factor is sustaining a capability, because one of the things we feel you get with a program approach is you get continuous learning. You'll move team from scheme to scheme to scheme, and you won't have the situation we have at the moment where we mobilize a team, they learn all their trade, and then we demobilize them. And the background is we've actually got a real demographic problem in the power electrification and power workforce. As you can see, it's declined significantly since the end of the major CP5 programs. And so, there could be, a cynic might say, well, you haven't got the people, so why should we let you do the work? The flip side of that, especially in a scenario where the government wants to see growth, is that actually this is creating some good high value jobs, and there's 25 years of work for them. I should have mentioned that when we did, if I go back a couple of slides to this one, we did this work, and we went through each segment saying what needs to be true to reduce the cost. We built a spreadsheet, not as complicated as one of Robert's spreadsheets, but we built a spreadsheet. And we think the range is of opportunity beyond an efficiently delivered project today. If you adopt this program approach, you take another third out of the cost of electrification. And we think that's hopefully enough to get decision makers to pay attention and think about a different approach. But to do all of that, you need to have a different way of delivering it, because you're moving away from a project by project approach to a programmatic approach with teams that go from scheme to scheme, which is quite different from how we normally work. So what might that look like? Well, you could say, well, the background you need is an agreed strategy. You'd need contracts that are up to 10 years long to allow support for building and sustaining capability. You need the client to decide how many teams they wanted to put out. Because of the way we'd be working, those suppliers would need to work nationwide, not just on a particular project geography. And I think an important thing is, if we're trying to sustain and grow capability, there should be a minimum allocation of work to those successful suppliers. But you don't want to lose the competitive pressure. So perhaps if you allocated up to 50% of the work bank and the suppliers competed for the other 50%, that would keep good competitive commercial pressure on. And obviously we want to see reductions in unit rates, and perhaps there'd be incentives for that. Now that's quite different to most contracts in the railway today, but it's not unique. It has been done before. The train control systems framework, which went live about 18 months ago, does pretty much that. So it has been done once before, so why couldn't we do it for electrification? So that's essentially what we're working on. We've done a number of reports, but there still isn't a rolling program. So what we want to show is that, first of all, electrification is affordable. We've banked all the innovations, but we need a new commercial approach, and we need to make the case for a business case program, a program business case, and program approach to implementation. So watch this space. We're working on that report, and we will aim to publish it in September. So it's over to you now for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so we can put the now then, if you would like to ask a question, well, first, we've got a question in the chat, at least one. So we'll Noah, yes, thank you. Noah's put it. What I don't know is whether those on the call can put their little yellow hand up, but we can turn your camera and microphone on if you'd like to ask a question. So experiment with putting your little yellow hand up, or put a note in the Q&A that you'd like to ask a question verbally, and we'll turn your camera on. So if we start with the first question, which is from Angela Cavell-Birch, and she asks a very good question, which is we have asked as well, and her question is the UK electric network ready for the extra draw of electric power the new locos will consume, and is the infrastructure up to it? Robert, I think you've got a view on this. Would you like to pick that one up?
No. Well, yes, I would like to pick that up. And no, the UK electric network is not ready for the additional draw of electric power. That was one of the things that was mentioned often to us when we were doing the strategy. That there's no electricity, it takes too long, and it was one of the reasons for us doing the strategy, because if we can show a plan of what is going to be electrified, it allows the electrical distribution organisations and the government to think about how that can be supplied. So to be a demanding customer rather than just sitting and taking what's given, but it's not ready. To replace diesel on the railway network takes an extra 2.5 terawatt hours of electricity a year. To replace diesel on the network. To replace diesel on the road network takes about 155 terawatt hours of electricity a year. So if the railway's not ready for it, the roads are definitely not ready for it. That's a strong driver for modal shift. Is that electricity balance?
And that's actually a great segue into a question I wanted to ask Noah. But Noah, if you feel free to add to what Rob's just said about power, but I was interested in exploring a little bit more about what you said earlier about measuring modal shift, and you talked about scope 4, I think, but also the making decision makers more mindful of what rail can do for modal shift. You're muted, Noah.
Sorry, Dave. So what was the specific question?
The specific question, well, do you want to add anything to what Rob said about power supply? But then the specific question is, can you just expand on what you think the challenge is in getting decision makers to evaluate what rail or indeed other public transport can do for modal shift, be it passenger or freight?
I can't add to what Robert has mentioned on that. I know of the issue, but it's not my technical space. So I think that Robert is I can't really contribute more to what Robert's already said on that. In terms of the modal shift, I think we're working our way into the issue, so it's still coming into focus. But I think some of the immediate challenges are that there's a real opportunity in terms of the social benefit, and I was even curious whether the social benefit of pace on some of these would be weaved into RIA's papers, as well as a business case. But there's a real social benefit to modal shift because a lot of people can't afford electric vehicles, and so that's an important element. I think the modal shift is very difficult to measure. It's very local. There's not a simple way to measure it. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis. So we're looking at how we can construct, a picture, tell a story in the most effective way. I think one of the issues it's a good thing by encouraging companies or motivating companies to report their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, is that it becomes very, they only end up reporting the impacts of their organization, their direct impacts. And so we're looking at how that can be expanded so that we can begin to pull together more information, tell a better story. But it's not straightforward.
If I can be possibly controversial.
Yes.
We said we haven't massively looked at the social value of rail decarbonisation. A, because we didn't have the sort of tools to do it, but B, because we felt it was first and foremost important to show that it was a better way to run your railway. Why we called it a lower cost, higher performing railway, because an electric railway or a decarbonised railway, whether it's electric trains or battery electric trains, will be cheaper in the long run, and it'll perform better. It'll be a better railway. And the controversial bit is, in particular, since we wrote the report, whether it's in America or elsewhere, there's a dialing back of the emphasis on net zero and decarb in political circles. So we feel it's quite important to make clear that this is good business, and it gives you a carbon and social benefit as well, almost like free. And for those decision makers that really value that, would love to enumerate that. But I think, we have to win the case first that it's good business. It's not. So I don't know whether anybody on the call thinks that's controversial, but I think it's currently my views. I think that's pragmatic.
I mean, I agree that, in the various interactions I've had across different organizations, different conferences, etc., we're in a time where net zero needs to be coupled with something else to create a driver, whether it's business or efficiency or social impact or something. But a standalone net zero, as you say, doesn't have the leverage that maybe it did 5 years ago, just because of the economic climate we're in.
Yeah. So I see we've got another good question. So Robert, have you seen the question from Rebecca Taylor? Does the decarbonisation tool take account of the lead times for rolling stock procurement and delivery, assuming proposals are affordable? So I think it might be worth explaining what the rolling stock tool can and can't do.
The tool isn't accurate enough to say what trains are needed and what routes. It did take into account that it takes 5 to 7 years to get a new train on the network, but it doesn't go into that level of detail.
Am I right in thinking what you've shared on the Power BI is what we used to call the sort of date of birth graph?
Yes.
Yeah. So just to explain what we mean by that, what the data is today's fleet, when was it introduced, and all the data about what it is and who's operating it and so forth. So what that will allow you to do is, if you make some assumptions about how long a train will last, say 35 years, then you can look at that graph and you can work out when you'd need to be thinking about replacing that train. So it's more a backward-looking thing as a database of current assets, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah. In the paper that we released last year, we did look at the smoothing of rolling stock orders by power type, not in a train operator level, but in a national level. So we did think about how fleets could be bought if those fleets were cascadable.
There's a great question here from James Sison, and this is a question that's often asked. So James is saying, in the 4 years between the TDNS and RIA reports, confidence in battery technology seems to have reduced requirement to electrify the network by 24%, 90 down to 66%. Will continuous improvement in battery technology further reduce the requirement for an electrified network if factors such as charging time, charging locations, and battery life are enhanced? So I'll have a little go at that, and then Robert, you can add to it. So the battery technology is going to improve, but there's a number of limitations on it. It's always going to be for an intensively used railway, major trunk network like the existing electrified routes like East Coast, West Coast. It's always going to be cheaper to operate in the long term to operate a fully electric railway rather than carry around your power in batteries, even if they've become more efficient. The other thing that I mentioned is I think we're a long way from having a plausible long distance freight battery technology. Freight is going to need continuous wires if it's going to be decarbonized. For all of the battery, even if you assume batteries were going to be twice or three times as efficient as they are today, they're not going to do freight trains long distance. Where I think that continuous improvement will help is it will reduce the amount of infrastructure that we'll need on the third we're not electrifying. You won't need to put up quite as, and it'll nibble at the edges of the third we are electrifying, and it will allow us to have, as Rob was describing, a good phased program where you and the beauty of all this, I think the punchline is, to me, it's fairly obvious where you need to fully electrify in the 2030s. And during the 2030s, we'll see how batteries are improving, and we can make a decision in the 2030s what we're going to wire in the 2040s. And if batteries have improved, we'll do less wiring in the 2040s. Does that make sense, Robert? Do you think?
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And the other factor in battery development is batteries will need to be changed in rolling stock midlife at best, which gives opportunities for improved battery technology in 10, 15-year-old trains, giving improved range and improved speed of the units. So it's by buying battery trains now isn't going to stop the development and application of improved battery technology in the railway.
And what we really fear, and you saw some hints at it yesterday with the Midland Main Line announcement, we think there's a real risk that it's an easy political decision to say, well, I'll just wait because there's going to be a magic bullet, e.g. Battery technology, that's going to save me having to spend money on decarbonising, including electrification now. We think that's very short-sighted and foolish because you've got a lot of work. Whatever the technology for decarbonisation is, you've got to do a lot of it between now and 2050, which is only 25 years away. And if you don't start chipping away at it, you're going to have a mighty rush in the 2040s. And more importantly, you're foregoing the opportunity to improve things for today's passengers. So the sooner you start rolling out electrification and or battery trains, then you improve things for today's passengers and you start reducing the cost of running the railway. I can see we've got 5 more minutes, so there is an opportunity for probably one more question. If anybody would, there's a new question, I think. Okay. This is a comment, but I think we can add to it as well. So Angela Cavill-Birch has come back and with having asked the question earlier and said, I really feel a piece of work needs to be done jointly with the electric network suppliers on the resilience of the network against extra use of the existing and planned. We agree.
Yes.
and absolutely. We have tried to stimulate that conversation. In actual fact, I've got I met a senior figure from the electricity industry a couple of weeks ago, and I'm following that up. Again, it's one of these things where we can stimulate the thinking, but we can't make it into a strategy because we're only a trade association. There's huge opportunities if we have that big grown-up conversation with the electricity network. But as Robert's already highlighted, we're only a small part of the problem. So everybody's focusing on how you deal with EVs, and we're not even at the table properly. we need to come to the table and be part of that discussion.
An option,
yeah.
One other option, or one other benefit of a battery traction strategy is batteries can be charged not from the supply network. Batteries can be charged private wire, private renewable energy can charge batteries, and that's one of the pictures that the database shows is where the demand is and what the demand is, and possibly helps explain that there are opportunities for private wire funding for battery trains that do away with the need to take electricity from the grid.
So to my fellow speakers, just while I ask whether there's any last question from the audience, I'm going to ask my fellow speakers if they've got one last thing that they'd like the audience to take away with them. And to give Rob and Noah a chance to think about it, I'll pitch mine in first. So the one thing I'd like you to take away and advocate for in whatever circles you operate in is that we need a track and train strategy for decarbonisation. We've put together a straw person. If as an industry we don't have such a thing, then we can't, nobody can plan sensibly for an efficient industry going forward. Rob?
Back to energy usage. A well-planned railway is the best use of energy for moving people and goods, and it needs government and a guiding mind to work out what the plan is.
No, what's your last thought?
Along the lines of traction, because I think this is the focus of today. There's a lot of RSSB has a lot of data and is mapping tools, and there's a lot of things happen in various spaces, and this work is really good. But the more we can stay joined up and support one another, I think, in developing the pictures that we need to create, the better. So I'd encourage just a lot of communication.
Excellent, thank you. There's a comment from Rebecca Taylor, and perhaps one day we'll have ultra rapid charging that means discontinuous OLE is feasible. I think discontinuous OLE is already feasible for passenger trains. I like the bit she says, a bit like water troughs in the days of steam. It is feasible for passenger trains. If we had ultra rapid charging, you'd need less wires, so that would be good. I don't see it being feasible anytime soon, if ever, for freight trains. And so I think if the only bit we wire is the bit that the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport recommended, the 800 kilometers, I think it was, we need to wire that to get the 90-odd% of freight under the wires. And as I mentioned, if you wire that, you've actually wired the major trunk passenger routes as well, so the passengers get a benefit. And our BAMUs would have a pantograph on them so that they can use the wires wherever they exist. So I think it's literally 11 o'clock, so it's time to pull stumps. And thank you all for joining us on this railway webinar as part of the Net Zero Week. If you go on the Net Zero Week website, you'll see there's lots of other interesting topics, and I know there's some about the power industry, for example. So if you want to go and ask them questions about how they're preparing for this power shortage, how they're going to find the 155 terawatts that Rob mentioned, then please join other Net Zero Week webinars. So I'm going to close the meeting now. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found it interesting and it stimulated your thought. And just to say thank you to my fellow speakers. Thank you to Noah and Robert, and I wish you all a good morning. Bye. And thank you for the nice comments.